So hi everyone, good evening and good morning, good afternoon, depending on your location from where you have joined us. So welcome to the another session of DataHour series. We are thrilled to be here with you this evening for a session full of action-packed learning. I am Rishabh Kumbhalkar, part of the data science team at Analytics Vidhya, and I'll be your moderator for this session. For those who have joined us for the first time, a brief introduction about the DataHour series conducted by Analytics Vidhya. The DataHour is a series of webinars led by top industry leaders. It is a fun way to understand the concepts of data science from leading players in the data tech domain. And as the name suggests, it's 1 hour dedicated to data. We are hopeful that these sessions are going to be a great source of enrichment and value adding for our community members. Now, on to our session today, which is about building your first chatbot using open source tools. So in this data, Rachael will be demonstrating how to build a chatbot using Rasa, an open source library for building chatbots. She will cover the basics of Rasa, including how words are translated into machine learning features and how the next conversation turn is picked. Now, on to our speaker. In this series of DataHour, we have Dr. Rachael Tatman from United States with us. Hi. Rachael has a PhD in linguistics from the University of Washington and began testing voice assistant, speech recognition systems like Amazon Alexa from a research perspective in 2016. Currently, she is a staff developer advocate at Rasa, where she helps developers use open source softwares to build great conversational AI projects. Previously, she was developer advocate for Kaggle, which is a part of Google, where she was working to grow the Kaggle platform and help the Kagglers develop professional data science skills. With this, over to you, Rachael, and the virtual stage is all yours. Thank you. So I hope you can unmute yourself. You're muted as of now.
I can,
Yeah.
yes, thank you.
Okay.
Hello, good. Well, it's morning for me, but I know it sounds like folks are from all over the world. So today we're going to talk a little bit high level conceptual stuff about how Rasa works, very generally about how chatbots tend to work. And then we're going to jump right into live coding. And I saw that Hardik had a question about whether or not I'm going to be doing an example with slots and buttons. Probably not. The example I'm going to be working with doesn't have slots, but if we have time, maybe. Probably not though. All right, so let's get started with the Rasa approach. And everything today that I'm going to be using is going to be open source and free to use. If you were building at an enterprise level and needed tools for that and support for that, we also have enterprise offerings. So I'd contact the sales team for this. But everything we're going to talk about today is open source. All right, so way back in the day, the way that you would build chatbots would be you'd have, maybe some chat logs or maybe, a list of things you wanted your system to be able to do. And a human, usually a linguist, would sit down and build some rules for that. So if you're familiar with Eliza, that was an early chatbot system. And that would take the thing that the user had said to the chatbot, it would parse it using parse trees, and then it would reform that statement into a question that the user would answer. That answer would be parsed into a question, and so on and so forth. So very rule-driven, very manual, very finicky. Fatima wants to know if Rasa just supports English. We're language agnostic, I like to say. So our examples are mostly in English, but you should be able to use a variety of languages. The ones that are directly supported by Spacey are going to be the easiest and quickest, but yes, it's not just for English. Any written language should work okay. And the big change in, I would say, the last from the early 2010s is really starting to focus more on not having to do everything by hand manually. That's no surprise to y'all. You know about deep learning and machine learning, and instead taking, machine learning algorithms, training them on language data, on conversational data, and really removing that manual step for something that's a little bit more flexible. And I shouldn't say totally removing, but the bulk of the work would now be more automated. So if you're thinking about the part of a chatbot where you decide what to say next, so a user has said something, you've done something to it, we'll talk about that in just a second, to take that text and convert it into, okay, I think this is what they mean. How do you choose what the chatbot says in response? And in a complete end-to-end system, these days, you could use something like a large language model and just take the raw text as input for output. I would strongly recommend against doing that for a number of reasons that I can talk about more if you have questions. But the sort of old school way was using something called a dialogue tree. And if you've ever played a video game where you have options of what you can say, and depending on what you say, the character you're talking to will say something else, that's an example of a dialogue tree. And for some chatbots, that's all you need. And that's how many of them worked and continue to work to today. So here's an example. And in this initial state, right, this is the nodes or the chatbot here. The edges are the user's suggestion. And here we have two examples. So one is that the user's interested in a mortgage. The other is that the user's interested in a savings account. If the user wants to do anything else, it will break. Question about whether or not it's possible to use Colab for the example today. Ugh. Possibly. I've had some trouble trying to run Rasa on Colab just because of the number of dependencies, but it might work. And yeah, I know some people have sort of hacked around it, but I'm just going to be using VS Code on my local computer. So if the user wants to do one of those things, it will change the state of the chatbot. The chatbot will reply. And then if the user wants to do the other thing, you can move them to the other state of the chatbot here. And if you really genuinely know that people are only going to want to do two things with your chatbot, then maybe this is a very, robust, condensed way to do that. Unfortunately, people are surprising and will say all sorts of things, right? I didn't anticipate precisely all the questions that everyone was going to ask in chat ahead of time. So this was sort of the old state machine dialogue tree sort of approach, very slow and costly to update. If you've ever worked with a large set of rules, you'll know that they interact with each other and it can be very difficult to keep a mental model of everything that's going on. And the approach that we take at Rasa, and we're not unique in this, but some of our algorithms that we've developed are, for the Rasa platform, and I'll talk about those in just a sec, are that instead of having just a state machine, we treat it as a multi-class classification problem, basically. So given, our training data and the current conversation, what should my next turn be, picked from among the potential turns? So in this example here, the chatbot could say a number of things. It could fetch primary phone, like a phone number. It could fetch primary email, and it could hand off to human. And using machine learning, we pick which of those options we think is the most likely given the conversation so far. So a little bit different, a little bit more flexible. And one of the big benefits of this is that if you have somebody who goes off topic or says something that you didn't expect them to say at that point in the conversation, a system like this can recover a little bit more gracefully than a state machine. So the general approach we recommend is to start with example conversations. These are called stories. I'll show you some examples, don't worry. You don't have to, immediately understand what this would look like in the code. So starting with sample conversations that you want your chatbot to be able to follow, learn from those as soon as possible, get your system in front of users so that they can begin interacting with it. Look at what conversations they have, add those to your training data, rinse and repeat. So it's this CI/CD cycle that uses actual user data. And I'm focusing here a little bit more on the dialogue system because that's more focused on chatbots. I know there was a talk about, text classification fairly recently in the series, so I don't want to, oops, sorry, my dog. So I don't want to overlap with a bunch of stuff that everyone already knows about. But the same thing would happen with the process of taking the individual turns and assigning them a label. You would, fold in additional turns. So that's the general process, which means that the first stage of, all right, sounds like everyone can hear me, good. So which means the first stage of building a chatbot would be to build a prototype that you can get in front of users as soon as possible, because people will surprise you. So this is a process we call conversation-driven development, and this is the whole product lifecycle. We're not going to do all of this. The first step is build a working prototype, MVP, minimal viable product. What's the absolute least that your chatbot needs to be able to do for you to be able to use it for your work? Share with testers who can, have conversations, maybe actual users that have, opted into the experience, maybe team members. At Rasa, we tend to send our chatbots back and forth to each other and be like, hey, have some conversations with this. We need to see what it's like. Review those conversations, annotate that data. So look at what people are saying, understand the patterns, add labels, remove labels, and then add that correctly labeled data to your training data. Test with end-to-end conversations. So what tests look like, particularly in something that's not state machine based, is this is the conversation that has to work every single time, right? This is the ideal path that we want people to go through, or this is the path that a lot of people go through, and we want to make sure that it's consistent and stable. And you would run those conversations top to bottom. And as long as those are stable, you should be good to go. So that's how testing works in the non-rule-based system. Track your desired outcomes. What are your KPIs, your key performance indicators? What's the business numbers people care about? What are the machine learning numbers that you care about? Make sure that those aren't going down over time. And then retrain, redeploy, bug fix, etc. So that last stage is just going to sort of repeat over and over again. Those of you who have worked with CDCI before are going to be like, yeah. And today we're going to work on building a working prototype together. And I'll go through the code and give you sort of an idea of everything that goes into the assistant. But first, I want to talk about the different parts, and we'll talk about how these map to the code. So the first part is natural language understanding. And this is a general field in computational linguistics and natural language processing. And the idea is that you take in the raw text input and convert it to a computer readable output. So for us, that is taking in the text input, vectorizing it in some way. So we had a question earlier about, do I have to use English for this? No. You can, of course, use pre-trained embeddings and pre-trained vectors, or you could train your own on your training data. And particularly for narrow domains, that tends to work quite well. So narrow domains, when people are talking about similar things most of the time, a chatbot that covers a wide variety of topics is going to be way harder to build. And in my experience, also a little bit less useful. So the narrower the better. And then from those, vectorized things, then it's, your usual multi-class classification. And the things that you're classifying into in this case are intents, which is a turn level marker or label of what somebody wanted to do. So from the example earlier, do you want to check a mortgage? I think that was the example. Do you want to check your mortgage? Do you want to open an account? Do you want to buy rice? Right? What is it that the human on the other end wants to do? And then the other thing that we're not going to get into a whole bunch today are a span level. So looking over the text span, picking out part of that span that has information in it. So this is often called entity recognition or named entity recognition. So this would be, when everyone's talking about, their name and where they're from, we might use named entity recognition to pull out all those place names and save them for some reason. I mean, I'm not going to do that, but that's an example of where you might use that. And then the dialogue policy to decide what the chatbot says next. Again, this is more chatbots focused. And these are our policies that we use an ensemble learning technique. So it's just vote, right? Majority vote based on confidence, so weighted by confidence. Memoization is a policy that's specific to Rasa, but most chatbot frameworks can do this, is, hey, this pattern, keep following it, right? So in this case, if I have an example conversation, a story, and our conversation is following the exact same pattern, keep doing the same thing that you've seen before in the training data, right? And then TED policy, which is a transformer-driven policy, which is really better for handling digressions. If you've worked with Rasa quite a bit, you know that this doesn't trigger often, but when it does, it's usually because someone has taken a very surprising conversational turn, and the TED policy is like, I know what to do here. Because of course, with transformers, that long distance attention can really help you, get back on track, or follow the user wherever they want to go. And then a fallback policy, what should we do next? This is the fallback policy is part of the rule policy. You can also add rules. We're not going to talk about that today, but you can do that if you want to. And then finally, we have the assistant responses. What does the assistant say? You can do these using natural language generation, so something like a large language model. I wouldn't recommend doing that. My recommendation to you is just to write down the things, or if you're working with a conversation designer, they'd write down the things. And then you can use slot filling. So for the example of taking out the entities of the where people are from, if I stored that in a variable, a slot called, user location, I could then, have a reply that's, oh, nice, what's the weather like in location? Y'all have had emails like that where they weren't filled quite properly, but you can use the same principle in chatbot responses. So that is the general parts. And now we're going to see what that looks like operationalized. What does this look like in the code? And sorry, I keep losing my mouse. We're gonna do some live coding. And just if anyone has any questions, wants to get in touch, Twitter's probably the easiest way. I'm RCTATMAN. I know a lot of folks use LinkedIn. I do not. I get a lot of LinkedIn messages. I don't generally get to all of them. And then I also have a YouTube channel myself that might be another good place to see more videos if you care to. All right, let me open my coding environment, and then I'm gonna quickly look through the questions to see what all y'all want to know. Could you please share the slides as well? Yes, remind me afterwards, please. Rachael says, how do we add custom actions where we use a CSV and returns volumes of the columns to a rule? Okay, is extracted using entities here. Good question. So the rule would trigger the action, and then I would probably have a condition on the rule that that slot had to be filled with an entity as well. Yeah. Okay. So I am in a, I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but I'm in an empty
yeah, Rachel,
folder.
that is visible.
Fabulous.
Sure.
I'm in an empty folder right now. It's a demo that I made for this. And I have created I'm trying to move the little Zoom thingy-doo. I've created and installed Rasa in a Conda environment previously. So if I do Rasa-H, I should get some information about it. Yep. And just as a note for those of you on Windows, I've had quite a lot of trouble recently with PowerShell and Conda, so I'd recommend the command prompt instead for those of you who are working locally on Windows. So Rasa has a command line utility that we're going to be using here, and we have more information on our docs, but this is the help in the command line. The command that we're going to be using first is Rasa init. And what this will do is it will create a new demo project, and it creates the same demo project every time. So let's run that. And it'll take a little bit. And I'm going to create it in my current directory, which as you can see is empty. And I'm also going to train a model. Take a tiny bit. And since I know some folks will ask, it is all TensorFlow based. And I think there was a question about TensorFlow versions, and I don't know off the top of my head what the most recent TensorFlow version is that will work with Rasa. I think 3.1.1 was our last cut. So yeah, I would double check the docs and the changelog. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the stuff that is scrolling right now. So these featureizers are what we're using to turn our words into our features. hence the name featureizer. Featureizer is a little bit of a Rasa thing that we call it. I don't think everyone calls it that. But we have some regular expressions, we have some lexical syntactic, we have some count vectors, and these are being trained on my provided data, which is why this will work, with other languages as well. Shruti says, is Rasa X still open source? Rasa X has never been open source. Rasa X is closed source, but free. So yeah, good question. And Rasa X is a tool for annotating chatbot data, basically. What's the difference between using Rasa Docker image and Ubuntu image or Python image? Which one would you suggest for the Docker installation? I'm assuming this has to do with the ephemeral installer, and I think it would depend on what exactly it was you were doing. Yeah, I know that's not a very good answer, but there you go. Okay, so here we are training the featureizers to convert the text into features, and diet is what we are using for is the classifier for the intents and the entities. It stands for dual intent entity transformer classifier. So we're using some multitask learning, and then the response selector is one of the things that part of the stuff in the machinery basically that helps you decide, your chatbot decide what to say next. Memoization policy we talked about, rule policy we talked about, tab policy we talked about. And unexpected is another part of the policy that sort of raises a flag if there's a turn from the user label that's particularly surprising. So this is to help with identifying potential issues in the natural language understanding. You may get the sense that there's a lot going on under the hood, and I gave you a sort of very high level explanation, and you'd be correct. Which command did you want if we want to try in parallel? Oh, so for parallelization, I'd ask on the forums. It'll depend. Okay, so let's talk to our trained assistant. And the way that a Rasa assistant works is that it runs on a server and you interact with it via the server. And then somebody asked about actions. So if you wanted your assistant to execute some Python code, we have a Python SDK that you can use to trigger that. And that would run on a separate server called the action server. And I said Python, we have a Python SDK. We also have a Go SDK that's a little bit experimental. And all our endpoints are documented in open source. So if you would like to use another language, you are free to, but it might be a little bit more work. So let's talk to our assistant. I'm going to start off the conversation by saying hi. And the this assistant is called Moodbot, says, hi, how are you? And I'm going to say, I'm sad, with a little sad emoji. And then if I click this, it's not going to open. So I'll just tell you, this is a little picture of a baby tiger. The assistant has detected that I'm sad. It says, okay, I need to execute this turn that sends a picture of a baby tiger to cheer it up. Did that help you? I'm going to say no, because I couldn't open it. And the assistant just says bye, because that's the end of the conversation. So we can try a new conversation. So if I say hi again, it'll ask how I am again, and I'm going to say very happy. And it looks like there's actually an error here. So I'm very happy. I don't need to be cheered up, but I've been given something that will cheer me up. And I'm going to say this time that it did help me. And then the assistant says, great, carry on. So this is sort of the general, I'm going to stop this. This is killing the server. This is the general structure of the chatbot. Let's look at what makes it run, and then we're going to tinker around with it a little bit, add a new type of thing a user can say, add a new thing that the assistant can say, and I want to be conscious of time, but we'll get as far as we can. Could I go a little slower? Oh, yes, sorry. So the commands that I've run so far were, I activated my Conda environment. I did Rasa-H to look at the help, always a good thing to do. And then I did Rasa init, and this created all of these files over here that we're about to look through. And then as part of that initialization process, I trained the chatbot. And you can see if I look here in models, I have a model that we just trained, and then I talked to it. And all of that happened as part of the initialization. If I wanted to talk to my assistant in the future, I could use the command Rasa shell. And this is also in the help. And it'll have to restart the server, so it takes just a second. And then I can have the same type of conversation I just had, or I could try saying, other things and using this as a way to test the assistant while I'm just getting going. Okay. Hardik says, can we provide an action after an action in stories without an intent in between? Yes, you can. If you are using rules, I believe there is a 2-turn limit on how many things can be triggered using rules. So you can with stories, but not with rules. Fatima says, how can we make our chatbot smarter? Great question. Depends on what you mean by smarter. Anonymous says, I can't see the question asked. Yes, they are in the question and answer view. And I think that's only visible to panelists, sorry. Oh, can we do morphological analysis experiments doing Rasa? We do not do morphological parsing, but yes, I suppose. It depends on what you were looking for. Yeah. And you can, so I'll talk about the pipeline in just a second, but you could add a parser very trivially if you wanted to do like some stemming or lemmatization or a full-on parse tree. Can we use any editor? Yes, I'm just using VS Code because I like it. It's installed. Nicole said, in situations where we get an error in stories, can we run the story again? I mean, repeating the story maybe. Yes, you can. I would add additional training data in that case. Okay, sorry, just going through all the questions. So we can see if I say something like goodbye to start the conversation, the assistant will immediately say goodbye. I'm not stuck having to start it saying hello every time and walk through the entire conversation, which is the benefit of using a more flexible approach. Let's look at some of these files and talk about what's in them and what we might want to change. So that's what I wanted. So I just wanted this to be smaller. Let's start by looking at the endpoints. I'm just going to tell you until you are working on putting this in production, you can just ignore this. And same with the credentials, you're only going to need to deal with these once you're starting to serve your model. While you're working in the prototype stage, you only really need to care about the config and the domain for these top level YAML files. The domain is everything that your assistant knows, right? So it's all of the things that it knows a user can say. It's all of the things that it can say to a user. It's all of the entities, types of entities that it can extract. So just walking through this, we have the Rasa version, it's 3.0. Intents are things, types of things that users can say to the assistant. So here we have 7, greet, goodbye, affirm, deny, mood great, mood unhappy, and bot challenge. Bot challenge is something like, is this a chatbot? Are you a real human? And you should always include that and always have a rule for saying, no, I'm a chatbot. You don't want to surprise people. Responses are the things that the chatbot can say to the user. We will say our chatbot will never ever say anything that is not here on the responses. And in this case, it can say, things that I think we have seen most of already. So if it utter greet here is, hey, how are you? Utter cheer up is, here's something to cheer you up. Utter did that help? Did that help? Utter happy, great, carry on. Utter goodbye, bye. Utter I am a bot. I'm a bot powered by Rasa. So all of these are the only things that the chatbot can say. And then just some variables for configuring your chatbot. So here, the session will start over in 60 minutes. And if you've set any slots, we don't have any slots. You can see there aren't any slots listed here. Saved from a previous session, they will carry over to the new session, but this is moot. Okay, so that's the domain. And the config is, you're probably only going to need it if you are trying to modify your natural language understanding or your pipeline. So we had some questions about, languages other than English. We had some questions about, could I do morphological parsing as part of it? You can, you just need to change the config file. Recipes are new in 3.0, and it lets you have a lot more fine-grained control over what happens with your data, and basically it allows you to specify a DAG, a directional acyclic graph. You don't need to mess with this when you're just getting started unless you really want to. This is just metadata. If I change this to French, it would not make my chatbot in French because all my data is still in English. And then the pipeline, this is the default pipeline, and this is the default policies. The pipeline is for the natural language understanding, going from text to numbers. So one thing that you probably want to change if you weren't working in English is our default tokenizer is a white space tokenizer, which means that we break words into tokens based on whether or not there's space between them. Works great for English, works less great for other languages. So keep that in mind. Various featureizers. This one here works on a character level. So this will let you handle things like typos. And this should be a reasonable default for a lot of projects. You don't really need to mess with this unless you want to. Diet is our classifier for intents and entities, and then a bunch of other stuff. And then policies are what do we say next? And we've talked about all of these previously. I'm going to check the chat really quick. So when you're first getting started, you're probably going to want to edit the domain. You're probably going to only want to edit the config if you want to do something a little bit different with your data. So Rob says, how can I load it on any website? Can you elaborate? So you'd need a place to serve a server, probably some sort of container that serves your Rasa assistant, a second server for your actions, if you have any custom actions. Here we don't. And then you'd want some sort of front end. There are some open source widgets. A lot of people build their own. I'm not a front end person, so your mileage may vary there. And you'd connect the endpoints there so that when someone is typing in the widget, it'll send it to the server, and the server will send back more information. That's sort of a very high level overview of how you do that. Can we use Rasa for WhatsApp? Yes, we have a WhatsApp connector, so that should be pretty straightforward, hopefully. Himanshu says, if I have to create a Rasa chatbot for the insurance domain, how does the data gathering process go for training? Great question. So let's take this time to look at the training data. Because so far you can see I have, a list of things that I think people can say, but how do I get from the point where, I just have a list of things to the chatbot knows that when I say bye, I mean goodbye, right? How does this text get classified to this label? And the answer is by using training data. So let's start with NLU. This is, you want all of your intents to have training data here in one of your files. This is the default for how I recommend organizing your training data, but you can have it split across multiple files. You can have it all in one big file, as long as it's in following the correct syntax and in the data folder and has a YAML extension. Organize things how it makes you happy. So here we have the intent greet, and then we have a bunch of examples of how someone might greet. And I don't actually know off the top of my head how the mood data for MoodBot was collected specifically, but generally, if you're lucky enough to have chat data, you can extract it from there. You can have people, write pretend conversations and pick those examples out. We have some sample training data in a repository that I believe is called Rasa NLU examples on our GitHub. So you could use that to get kickstarted. But as you use your chatbot and as people use your chatbot and you begin to fold in that data into the training data, it will get better and better over time, hopefully. So here we have a bunch of things where people might say hello, a bunch of things where they might say goodbye, a bunch of examples of them saying, yes in various ways, no in various ways, a bunch of ways of people saying that they're happy. And if you remember earlier, when I said very happy, it did not get correctly identified. So I'm just going to add that example here under mood great. If I were using Rasa X, you can do this with buttons. I think it's a little bit easier to do in the command line, especially at the stage of development, but another tool. And then mood unhappy. So where people are talking about how unhappy they are. And you can see I said very happy, and we have 2 examples of people saying very here in the mood unhappy, and only 1 here in the mood great example. So I think that's probably what shifted my my example. And then some bot challenges. I'm going to add something here. Is this a real person? Again, what might somebody say? Or if you have real data of people saying things in this way. Yes, so gathering the data, if you have existing data, I check that out and use that. If you don't, you can, imagine it and then get it in front of users and then begin to use their data. And I have a talk from L3AI, which is an online conference Rasa put on a while ago called AI equals your data, where I go into a lot more detail of how you might go from having training data or not having training data and organizing it and getting it to this stage, basically. Can we do text to audio using Rasa? Yes, you'd have to use some sort of API though, right? We support it, but we don't build it. So you can connect it as you see fit. Where can we download the package? I'm assuming here you mean Rasa. I put it in the chat a while ago, but also it said that I was not Rachael, so you may need to scroll a bit. The Rasa Learning Center is probably the easiest way to find it. It's on pip, right? Rasa is on pip. If you're installing on Windows, there's some additional TensorFlow dependencies. Where can I download the YAML files? So all of these were created when I used the command Rasa init. So if you've installed Rasa, if you run Rasa init, it will create all of these files. You don't have to make them, but they are also on our GitHub, the Rasa GitHub, in the moodbot repository. That's MOODBOT. Can your updates be automated to chatbots already launched? Great question. So here I've added some training data. If I just try to talk to my chatbot again using Rasa shell, it won't change anything until I retrain my chatbot. So using Rasa train. And I'll just show you what that looks like. So I have added data. I don't think I actually saved this file, so it's not going to train anything. Oh, maybe I did save it. So once you have added data, save the file and then retrain it, and you will get a new version. You can see this is just a tar file with the TensorFlow model in it, basically, and we'll never overwrite. So you're going to need to have some sort of process for making sure that you're using the most recent version, but we also want to make it really easy to roll back in case something goes wrong. Oh, and a really a really long question from Himanshi about knowledge bases. I'm using a graph database. The database is very complex. The queries will also be complex. So generating them based only on intent is not an option. I could dynamically generate the query. Do you have any knowledge suggestion papers or anything that you can suggest for this scenario? Yeah, I mean, at some point, a chatbot probably isn't the right tool for that. If you have a number of pieces of information that you need to collect, I would use a form for that. And a form is just a series of rules, basically, that say, okay, I've identified that my user is trying to book a plane ticket. I need to know the name, the destination, the time, and how much they're willing to pay, stuff like that. And what a form does, it means you don't have to write all those rules. And also, if some of those slots are already filled, right? Like I know their price range, like they want to, economy ticket, and I already know the date that they want, then I won't ask them those things. Yeah, I might try that. I don't know. Yeah, that sounds like a complex problem. And at some point, again, is this something you would usually do in a conversational format, right? Is this something that usually would happen as a discussion? And if it wouldn't, probably not a chatbot problem. Would it connect with a LMS like Moodle or Canvas? Yeah, you probably could. We don't have a connector to those platforms specifically. You can see our connectors on our docs. I think we've got, WhatsApp, Slack, Twilio, a bunch of different ones. But yes, I think you'd probably have an easier time with Moodle than Canvas, because as I remember, Moodle is open source, I believe, and closed source, closed source LMS, you're probably not going to have much luck there. Can we tokenize any Indian languages using Rasa? Yep, absolutely. People use Rasa for a lot of languages in the Indian subcontinent. You may need to hunt down a tokenizer, but yes, people do it very successfully. Can we connect it with Alexa? Maybe. So I did a tutorial a while ago and then it was broken, but someone recently told me it's working again. So possibly, and that's on the Rasa blog. Rasa is rule-based. You can have rules in Rasa, but by default for deciding what to do next, looking at the config, we use a combination of rules, the TED policy, which is a transformer-based policy, and the memoization policy, which basically says, if I've seen this in my training data, keep doing it. The recording will be on YouTube. How do I serve Rasa model for website integration? Any resource for it? We have a course on using Docker on our Learning Center, which I believe is rasa.learning.com or learn.rasa.com. And it's also on our YouTube channel. So I think that would be a good resource if you're interested in using Docker. Can I use the model in a Python script without using Rasa shell? Yes, it will be harder, but feel free. If Rasa doesn't respond, how to connect it with a user for live chat? We have an example of how to do handoff is what that task is called in our GitHub, and I believe the help desk bot. So I would look there for a code example. Can I create a Persian chatbot? Yep. We've definitely had folks create chatbots in Persian or Farsi. How to add new conversations automatically as our data? Great question. After this one, I saw that there was a break in question answering. I'm going to take a quick pause and get back to looking at the code. You shouldn't add things automatically. And the reason is that if you're, okay, so let's imagine we have an error in our NLU, right? And we're accidentally saying that very happy is sad. And if we're automatically adding that data and we're not manually validating it and making sure that the examples that we're adding are correct, our chatbot is going to get worse and worse and worse over time. So I wouldn't automatically add it to your data. Okay, so let's keep going through here and then work on changing the chatbot a little bit. So rules, like I said, they work for two-turn interactions, basically. So every time somebody says goodbye, our chatbot's going to say goodbye right back. You saw an example of that here where I said bye, the chatbot said bye. And then every time somebody asks, hey, is this a chatbot? The chatbot will say, yeah, I'm a chatbot. And you can see that these are just for turns that always are the same way and might be interjected somewhere else in conversation. So you don't want to build everything with rules. It gets very difficult to follow what's going on. It gets very hard to maintain. And it's much easier for users to get stuck if you're only using rules. It's possible, I wouldn't recommend it. And then for stories. So these are the conversational examples that I was talking about. This here is just a name. So this could be whatever you want to name the story. Intents are things that the user is detected as having said. So what does greet look like? Well, it looks something like these examples here from the greet, and it should generalize fairly well. Dia is pretty flexible. And then the chatbot will respond, utter greet. Where is that coming from? That's coming from in the domain file where we wrote down what the chatbot would say when we triggered this. So the user says hi, the chatbot says hi. The user says, I'm feeling great. And then the chatbot says, utter happy in this case, which is great, carry on. And then if we look at other stories, again, this is just a name, it's just a variable name, it could be whatever. Here, the user says they're unhappy. The chatbot says, oh, here's a picture of a baby tiger. Did that help? The user says yes. And then the user says yes, and the chatbot says, great, carry on, that utter happy utterance. This is the example that we ran into when we were talking to the chatbot earlier. Pretty much the same, but when the chatbot asks, hey, did that help? And the user says no, the chatbot just says goodbye. So let's change this, because I think that this turn in particular was a little bit abrupt, right? So I'm going to add a new action where the chatbot can says utter sorry, right? So it just says something like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. which I think is just a little bit less abrupt. So right here, the chatbot doesn't know what to say when this action is triggered. We have to add it to the domain. So let's add it down here. Utter sorry. And then I'm going to have it say text. Oh, sorry to hear that. And a little sad emoji there. I'm going to save this. I'm going to save all of my other files that I was working on. I think it was just the stories, right? And then we're going to retrain, and we should now have Rasa train. We should now have a new way to respond if somebody is shown a picture of a baby tiger and isn't happy as a result. All right. Looking back at some questions, can we say that Rasa is more productive for retrieval-based chatbots as compared to generative-based chatbots? Yeah, it's not. So the specific type of chatbot that Rasa is designed to build is what's called a task-oriented dialogue system, where somebody comes to the chatbot and they want to do something, and it's good for that. It's not good for the general task of chit-chat bots, where you basically have an open-ended, free-flowing conversation, which again, in my experience, is not super useful. Most people who use Rasa use it for work, and it is rare that your work requires somebody to just have an open-ended, general topic conversation. All right, so we have trained, and let's do Rasa shell and check out what that looks like. So this time when I'm shown a picture of a baby tiger, and if I say I'm sad, I should not just be told goodbye. I should be told, oh, I'm sorry, and then goodbye. Yeah. Purnima says, where can I get a step-by-step guide to chatbots? So on our YouTube channel, we have the conversational AI with Rasa course, and that is more of a step-by-step guide that goes into a lot more detail. This is just sort of a high-level intro. How to retain the previously asked context in a Rasa server? Great question. So it will be saved, and where it is saved changed. So I believe it is cached or cached, depending on your dialect. Locally, when you're running the server, it'll be run in the server log. So by default, all the conversations are saved. Sorry, my hair is escaping. I would love it if Rasa seamlessly deployed in various applications. Yeah, it'd be nice. Okay, so let's have a new conversation. So I'm going to start it off by saying hi. Hi, how are you? So now I'm going to say I'm sad. I'm going to get shown a picture of baby tiger. Did this help? And then I'm going to say, no, it didn't help. I'm still sad. And now we should get a new response, and we get a new response. Oh, sorry to hear that. And then bye, which is still a little bit abrupt, but I think it's a little bit less abrupt. So here we have this conversation, but something to think about is how your stories interact with each other. So here we only have one story example saying what to do if somebody says deny, right? So if I just say something that should be identified as that intent, no, I immediately get the response, oh, sorry to hear that, and then bye. And that's because there's only one example for the chatbot to learn from about what to do in that situation. Sorry, these ones, what to do in that situation. So it's, it's training data just like any other training data, and you'll fit to the patterns that you see in there. So there's not, it's still going to guess, right? It's a classification algorithm. It's still going to make its best guess, but it'll guess based on the data. So it is, fairly predictable what it will do if you have looked at all the data. All right. And okay, we've got quite a few questions. How to deal with choice intents. So I'm assuming this is something like somebody can choose what to do next. And for that, I would use excuse me one second. I would use a form if what you're doing is collecting information, right? So let's say you're doing seating at a party and you want to figure out what everybody wants to eat. And you're like, hey, would you like, beans or, cheese for your dinner, which of those is good. And if someone says, oh, I want the cheese, you'd extract that using probably a slot and save it. If it's something where somebody could say multiple things and what you want the chatbot to do depends on what they say, then this is actually a really good example of that. So here, right, up until the utter cheer up, these are exactly the same. You don't have to have all your stories start from the total beginning and go to the total end, just like big chunks that tend to be pretty stable. But here, when the user says affirm, the chatbot says utter happy. When the user says deny, then we do these other things. There's also something called check pointing. So if there's a point at a story where, a user could do 8 different things next, but the point before that story is going to be, before that point is going to be pretty consistent, you can insert a checkpoint. So basically the story goes, it's the same to the checkpoint, and then after the checkpoint, it starts at the checkpoint, and then you have stories for all the different things that your chatbot can do. So I hope that answers your question. Zeneb wants to know, there's a question in the discussion zone. Okay, I can open that up later. Zeneb says, if the responses are generated based on the defined file, so well, I wouldn't say they're generated, they're selected. Isn't it rule-based? Are we going to enhance the same blot using NLP to learn the responses by itself? I would recommend against this. So I sort of hinted about this a little bit earlier. So like I said, the thing that people tend to use Rasa chatbots for are task-oriented dialogues, which is I want to do something, or my customer wants to do something, I want to make sure they do it. Natural language generation is, very hard. Any of you who have worked with, something like BERT or GPT-3 know that it's, it's difficult, it's unpredictable, and particularly with a lot of the work, exploratory work being done on the OPT models that came out last week. The likelihood that your chatbot will generate using those models something wildly inappropriate, either just false, right? You'll lie to a customer, or deeply offensive, is so high that I would never recommend that you put generated text directly in front of users. So I wouldn't do that. And the other thing is, if you are building a chatbot, particularly for business application, there are things that you need that chatbot to do. You don't need, so in this example, right, this is a chatbot to cheer somebody up. I don't need to have a bunch of responses about what the weather is like, unless I know that that's going to help cheer somebody up, right? So that would just be out of scope. And I would say if you find yourself thinking about like all the possible things somebody could say, your scope is way too wide. Think about the things that they actually do say. And anybody who's worked in customer support or like at a shop or anything knows most of your conversations are about like the same 4 things, right? So you have a big, very common, small number of things that people want to do. And then you have a really long tail of much rarer things that few people want to do. So it's a Zipf-ian distribution, basically. It applies to conversational turns as well. And if you focus your time on the like 3 things that most people want to do, and if somebody wants to do something in that long tail, right, something out of scope, just say, hey, I can't do that, I'm a chatbot, or pass them off to a human assistant. You still get a lot of time savings from handling those most common things. So I understand the appeal, and it is like a cool, interesting problem. It's just, again, in my experience, it's not that helpful, not that useful, and I'd recommend spending your time elsewhere. Zeneb says stories makes conversations less flexible, I think. Interesting. So far, we've mostly seen the memoization policy, right? And this is a very small, very simple example. Let's first start by stopping our assistant. So there is, it's not in the help. Never mind. I was gonna do something, but I don't want to. If I share pull up something, I'm not going to be able to see. But basically, stories are training data, and they will make it less flexible because you can absolutely do things that are not in the stories. And the reason that you can do that is by using the TED policy. So the TED policy uses the information in the stories to make the best guesses about what to happen next, and can pick from anywhere in any of the stories, basically is the short of it. Questions from the chat. Yeah, there's no participation certificate. If you're interested in learning more about Rasa and becoming certified, we do have a developer certification program, and that is on the Rasa Learning Center as well. It's free, you get 2 attempts. And I would recommend going through that conversational AI with Rasa course beforehand to make sure that it's you know what you're what's in there, because it's like the learning goals are very clearly defined, but that's what you'll be tested on. Great question from Rose. If users can ask several questions or say hi in different ways, do we enter all the lines of the intent? Like hi, could we say hi, howdy, sup, etc., like 100 different ways? Really, really good question. So how much data, how many examples do you need in an intent? So general rule of thumb, at least, about 12, like I'd say at least a dozen when you're prototyping. Do you need more than that? It really depends, and it depends on a couple of things. So one, what are people saying? Are people saying hello in a wide variety of different ways? And if they are, is your assistant accurately capturing those? So if they are saying it in a wide variety of different ways and your assistant is accurately capturing it with your existing training data, you don't need to do anything. If they're not saying it in a wide variety of different ways, then it doesn't matter, right? You just need to give enough examples that your assistant can capture that, I don't want to necessarily say understand, because I think that's overstating the abilities of this particular type of approach, can stably and consistently pick up on the signal that, oh, hey, this is somebody saying a great intent. If it is naturally occurring data, right? If it's things that people are really saying and you're not just making it up, it's just not really too much data isn't usually going to be a problem. You may need to do a little bit of tuning, like reducing the number of epochs if you have like a lot of data, just so training time isn't too big. But if you have, in general, something that people can say in a lot of different ways, then you're probably going to want to provide more data, if that makes sense. Right. So saying hello tends to be pretty consistent. Saying that you feel really happy tends to be a little bit less consistent, right? People can say this in a lot of different ways. So, they could do like a happy emoji. They could be like, great. Right. There's a lot of different ways that somebody could say that they're feeling good. And I would say that this in general is going to be a little bit harder to capture just because it's a more distributed cluster, basically. Yeah, so I mean, add data until it works good for your users. How do you know it works good for your users? Look at their conversation. I know that's like I don't know how satisfying of an answer that is, but it's going to depend on your specific problem. Yeah. There's so many questions. Let's, what did I say we were going to do? I said we were going to add an intent. So I am going to add an intent really quickly, just so we can go over that process, and then I'll look at the questions. I know that we are getting close to having been doing this for an hour, but I'm available for a little bit longer. So if y'all are interested in sticking around, and it's okay with the hosts, I'm happy to hang out for a bit.
Yeah, sure.
Great, let's add an intent. So looking at our stories, is there something we're really not capturing here? I think that, something that somebody could say that we're not being able to capture here, and imagine that, ideally I'm having this conversation, looking at a bunch of user data of different people talking to this chatbot. But right now, the only things that people can say are that they are unhappy, or that they are happy. So I'm going to add a new way for people to say that they're doing, they're okay, sort of middle of the road. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just copy and paste this and then make some changes to it. So instead of sad path, I'm going to call this like just okay path. And what we're going to do is we're not going to ask if that helped after we show them a picture of a baby tiger. And I am going to say something else. I don't know what I'm going to call this. Mild cheer up, I guess. something else that we can say there, because right now the cheer up says here's something to cheer you up, so it's something to like preface to that, like I'm actually going to put it up here right next to the utter cheer up. So someone's like, oh, I'm just doing okay. What would be a good thing to say to them? And this is something a conversational designer would do if you have one on your team. Glad to hear you're not doing too bad. Okay, so that's something that we can say to the user when they're like, excuse me, one sec. This is something we can say to the user if they're just like, I'm just sort of okay, just kind of meh, just sort of middle of the road, that sort of thing. So glad to hear you're not doing too bad, but then we'll give them something to cheer them up. Maybe we'll get them to happy. So we have a new thing for our assistant to say. We are not going to ask them if they're happy afterwards. They don't have to say anything after it. And I'm just going to call this mood okay. And I am adding a new intent here in addition to a new action. So in my domain, I'm going to need to add a new intent. And this mood underscore here is just, this is not syntactic to Rasa. I'm just using this so that I have parallel variable names. Make sure I save everything because I sometimes forget. And then let's add examples for that. So mood great, mood unhappy, intent. The likelihood I'm going to make a syntax error here is very high. So we'll find out about that at training time. So some ways that someone could say that. I knew I missed a line. Some ways that someone could say that. Just okay. Meh. All right. If anyone in the chat, yeah, Jan had said Matt or neutral. I'm just going to use some examples from y'all. Neutral, fine. And what this is gonna, like, whether or not this is a good way to characterize what people are saying here is going to be culturally dependent. So this is thinking about, you know, in my day-to-day life, if somebody said this to me in, you know, my cultural milieu, it would mean this. I know that in a lot of places, right, this is not necessarily going to be accurate, which is why you want to make sure that you're thinking about your specific users. Can we use emojis in the training data? Yes, you should be able to. I'm going to add some emoticons, just sort of neutral face. Oh, that's a good one. Not bad, which could in some places, like I think if you were in England, you said not bad, you'd mean like pretty good. But in the US, if you're like, oh, it's not bad, it's just sort of like, all right, middle of the road. So, all right, some good examples here. Been worse. That's another one that people tend to say, not so good. And I'm just going to really quickly look at these. Not good, not very good. Yeah, I think, so that might be an example that it would be a little bit difficult to pick apart from whether or not it should be mood unhappy or mood okay, but I think it should be, well, for me, I think this is closer to mood unhappy. So I'm not going to include that, but again, in a different cultural context, it might be the best example. Yeah, and I already added so. Let's save that. So we have our new intent that we have examples for. It's used in the stories, and we have a new action And both of the new intent and the new action are defined in here. So I'm going to retrain and find out where my syntax errors are, because I'm sure I have some. And then we'll see if the new conversation works. And then I'll get to some more questions. Oh, it looks like I didn't have any major obvious errors. We'll find out. Yeah. TP says, how to define a loop to utter happy till the user intent becomes happy. Oh, so you want to loop through it. You could do a rule, I guess. So, if the user says they're unhappy, show them a tiger. If the user says they're unhappy, show them a tiger, that sort of thing. Yeah, loops are a little bit weird. I would say in general, I try to avoid them in conversations. And often if you see them in your data, it means that you need to tune your dialogue a little bit more, because generally people don't like it. All right. So we should have a new model here. We do. Fabulous. We're up to 4. Also, these, if any of you used Rasa a while ago, the more readable names are a recent addition. How does one enable chat in languages other than English? So you would, in here where I have English data, I would change it to non-English data. And then if I needed a different tokenizer, I would, replace parts of my my config file to make more sense for other languages. Yeah, but you should, because a lot of the steps here are just based on your training data, you should be more or less okay if you just replace the English, as long as the tokenizers work with your target language. All right, so let's talk with the bot and see how it goes. How are you? I'm going to say kind of meh. So this is something that wasn't in our training data. I don't think. Let me double check. The word meh is in our training data, yeah, but we don't we don't have the word kinda, and we don't have that exact turn. So somebody had a question like, do I need to list everything? You shouldn't need to. This should be picked up okay. There we go. We get the response, the utter cheer up mild or something. Glad to hear you're not doing too bad. Here's something to cheer you up. So this is the exact conversation that we had. So I am now going to try and say something else. So somebody said, hey, don't stories mean that you can only do things in the stories? Nope. So for example, here we have the bot challenge rule. Let's trigger that. So I'm going to say, are you a person? Which again, I don't think that exact thing is in our training data. And I should get this response. I'm about powered by Rasa. And then if I say something like, I'm very sad. So this isn't something that just on its own occurs in the stories. Utter mood unhappy only occurs once, right? Sorry, once here and then once in the story, but in the same sort of general situation. So when I say this, it should be detected, okay, mood unhappy is happening. What should we say? Well, we haven't seen this upper part of the story before, but we know, when we see mood unhappy, most likely what we should do after is try to cheer the person up. So again, this is going to be a guess. And you can see that even though we don't have any examples of the bot challenge followed by somebody saying they're very sad, it's still correctly identified, oh, okay, I should cheer them up. Here is the picture of the baby tiger. And then, oh, after I show them a picture of a baby tiger, if that happens because they said they were unhappy, I have to ask them if it helped, right? So here we have an example of the showing a picture of a baby tiger, but it didn't occur in that same situation. So we don't get just nothing after, we do get this did it help utterance after, if that makes sense. It's more flexible than it seems, but also more predictable. I don't know if that makes, I don't want to keep asking if that makes sense. I hope this is a clear demonstration. All right. No idea. Someone asked how Amazon virtual assistant works. I have not worked with it. How to start contributing to Rasa? Oh, great question. So we are open source and we have a contributors page, which I think is rasa.com/contribute, possibly. And we have a board of open GitHub issues that would be good for a user to get started with. So I check out there. Is Rasa trying to ask or mine data from online as users at questions? Great question. So we don't currently do hosting. You would self-host your own server. You would self-host your own website, do all your own stuff, basically. It could be completely on-prem. If you wanted it to be, air-gapped, you could do that as well. So we don't. We do have some telemetry, but again, it's up to you how much of that you want to interact with and provide. How to add custom YAML in the data folder. Oh, so if I wanted like another type of data, I could just do, new folder. Nope, that's a folder. I just need a file. New file, new data.yaml. So all of the examples based on the YAML syntax will be added. So I could, split my NLU data into mood examples and other examples if I wanted to. There's no data in here now, but it would be included as well. DP says, how to try cheering the user up till they're happy instead of ending the conversation. So one thing that you could do is, in this example, you could have a little bit of a longer example, right? Utter cheer up, did that help? If they say no, then instead of saying sorry and goodbye, we could, continue to do utter cheer up, and have that example. And if we removed this example of just saying sorry and then goodbye after someone says deny, then that would always happen after they say deny, basically. Yeah, if that makes sense. How to debug a Rasa chatbot? We do have a debug flag. That I think is just debug. And we'll give you, excuse me, a lot more information as you go through and you have your conversation. Yeah. What does conversation-driven development look like in its full form? Well, so we would, next steps, we would launch this chatbot. People would use it. Usually you start with testers who know that they're testing the chatbot. Someone, maybe you, would go through and review those conversations. You would add training data for types of situations that aren't covered well by your current assistant but come up. You would correct mislabeled data and then add that to training data. You would retrain your model and then you would launch with a new model, right? So in our example, every time we retrained, we would have been like, okay, now we're pointing to this model, now we're pointing to this model, etc. And then I'm gonna say this is the last question. My voice is starting to go. What is the best way to integrate to other chatbots that they don't stay in the default connections? So I'm assuming that question is about our connectors. The endpoints are documented. So basically you would need to, create some way of passing information back and forth between the chatbot endpoints and the endpoints of whatever service it is that you're using. And I would also poke around a little bit because a lot of people have built and then open sourced various connectors as well. So someone might have already built what you're looking for. But yeah, it's web development stuff. your Rasa assistant, when it's running, has ports, and you connect to those ports and you send the information back and forth. Yeah. Can we call the API as an action? Yes, absolutely. So we did not talk about actions. You can see that this is all typed, commented out, but you can, run Rasa code that you trigger as part of a conversation. And if we look at these stories here, you can see that here all of our actions are the chatbot saying something. This action could be something from our actions.py, some sort of function that we've defined and run based on various parts of the conversation. So that one of the things that action could do would in fact be calling an API. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. All right. I'm gonna stop sharing now. Lots of questions. Thanks, everybody. You're extremely engaged. I hope I helped, and that my voice is not too distracting.
Yeah, that's fine. I guess we have covered most of the questions. Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much, Rachel. On behalf of Analytics Vidhya, I would like to thank you for such a wonderful session. And it was really interesting and insightful for me as well. And I'm sure our audience found it insightful as well. And hopefully we can conduct much more sessions with you in the coming future. Thank you. Okay,
Yeah, lovely. No, we're
now
great.